Deputy Head, who's responsible for reform implementation, Dmytro Shymkiv, and that is with the support of International Renaissance Foundation. I would like to start my presentation, ladies and gentlemen, journalists, media, with an important phrase, Je suis volnovakha. Because what happened, this act of terrorism of terrorists from Donetsk and Lugansk Republic that is supported by Russian side, that is the challenge to peaceful Ukrainian society. And I would like us to always remember that, even when we are discussing reforms and the future of the country, so that we always understand that the security of our country and fighting against terrorism is not just the issue discussed in Ukraine, that is the global issue. And when I talk about economic forum in Davos, I would like to mention that. And recently they issued the report on global risks. I also would like to congratulate you all with these previous holidays. We had an interval in our briefings. We now resume them once every 2 weeks. I will be reporting and telling you about what's happening with reforms in Ukraine. And during these weeks of New Year holidays, there were some important events taking place because the commission that will select the head of anti-corruption bureau started operating, and I believe that's an unprecedented step because the publicity of the work of commission, the discussion of the future work of anti-corruption bureau, its lead, and announcing the transparent competition means that the president, the government do execute all their commitments. The body which is to investigate on senior officials, the body which will be fighting corruption will be set up, and its leader is to be selected according to maximum transparent procedure. There was a big discussion, submission of draft laws and approving in the first reading the draft laws on judicial reform, setting up the working group on drafting the amendments to the judicial reform, because the issue of judicial reform was mentioned in the end of the last year during the meeting of the National Council on Reforms, where there was an interesting discussion of the judicial reform and so on. Now, I would like to say something about another important topic, and that is on Economic Forum in Davos, which starts its work today and which will last for the next 4 days till the 24th of January. Approximately 40 leaders of the leading countries of the world will be there. An interesting topic of the World Forum will be the new global context. And recently there was a global risk report issued, and it is important that the issue of conflicts, international conflicts, and the risk related to that got the highest degree of threat. Is the risk which is the biggest threat for the countries of the world, and in comparison to other issues which were previously of economic nature. President Poroshenko, President of France, François Hollande, Angela Merkel will attend the forum. For the first time, the President of Ukraine will have a big session where the President will be presenting the future of Ukraine, and that is official part of the forum. That is important event, a significant event for Ukraine to explain the position of Ukraine in the world as to the issues of security of Europe, as to reforming the country, economic stability of the country. Besides, there will be additional sessions on Ukraine. There will be a lot of Ukraine during the forum. That is the session on scenarios for Ukraine looking the vicious circle, and that will be the issue on how Ukraine can achieve development of public institutions when implementing the reforms. In Davos, the representatives of the government will be making presentations, the Minister of Finance, the head of the National Bank, the Minister of Economy, and so on. Also, there will be additional special session which was planned at the initiative of Klaus Schwab as to discussing by the representatives of big business and the authorities of Ukraine, Russia, and other global states as to addressing the problems and economic consequences of the conflicts taking place in Ukraine. It's called Geneva Ukraine Initiative, and there will be the traditional event, which is Ukrainian breakfast in Davos, organized by Viktor Pinchuk. I would also like to emphasize that all these events demonstrate the importance of what's happening in Ukraine, issues which will be covered during discussions, because I will also participate from the 23rd to the 24th in the meeting of Davos Forum. The issues will be economic reform, social reform, security of the state. Unfortunately, we don't have enough information about the events taking place in Ukraine, about the steps Ukraine is making with reforms, issues of attracting additional financial assistance and assistance from establishing peace in Ukraine, that we need badly. Now, talking about some of the strategic initiatives, you know that the President approved Strategy 2020, which defines very important vector for the movement of the state. It also defines key indicators, benchmarks for 2020. The decree introduces many different notions like revolution of dignity. That's a legal term now. There is a term vector of movement, key indicators or key benchmarks, and also back to the issues that we've been discussing during our previous briefings. Now the Cabinet of Ministers is working on that, because the plan of restoration of the country, which is developed together with the European Community, is the main document with which donors will be working during donor or investment conference, which is planned for the end of March, beginning of April. That's also the result of discussions with the European Union and representatives of European establishment who were arriving recently to Ukraine. And the Cabinet of Ministers is leading that, Gennady Zubko and Aivaras Abramavičius. Now, as to some legislative initiatives and the status of that, as you remember, I haven't mentioned that, sorry. You do not remember that? But now there's a draft law being prepared on digital Ukraine. It's called Digital Ukraine, and that's the package of draft laws on some sectors. First one is the law on open data and providing this data in the format legally. It's in the format which could be used by electronic systems to use this data for further processing. Ukraine joined that convention of open data, but legislatively that makes the authorities to publish all their reports and many of the information resources in electronic format. The second draft law is a realization of electronic petitions and the electronic applications, and we looked at the experience of the Great Britain, US, and Germany, how this works. Also, we are working, and recently, on the 15th of January, there was a public discussion with participation of this presidential administration, Ministry of Economic Development, and so on, the legislative initiatives on electronic signature. That is an issue which is so important to introduce electronic document circulation, understanding that electronic signature is not a panacea. We need to consider the issue of electronic identification and also switching to European standards, not to concentrate on electronic digital signature of Ukrainian origin, but their ability to use the global standards recognized by the world and international and European standards. This is the package, which includes several draft laws, and they are worked on with the experts, and the open data is a development of the reanimation package of reforms together with UNDP, the administration of the President and the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, and also Agency on Electronic Governance. And this is a very serious and important for the country thing. Now, as to the draft on public procurements, we have tested it. We identified some mistakes and solution. Now the second stage of testing starts. Who's testing? The public bodies. The civil society is developing it. And we hope that starting from February, we will launch the second phase of testing. The use of that solution for public procurements, to be able to do public procurements in pre-threshold range. As to National Council on Reforms and Executive Committee on Reforms, on the 19th of January, the decree of the President was published on introducing the single state policy in Ukraine, which covers some of the decisions made by the National Council of Reforms. First, that is beginning of creation, the project office, changes to the Executive Committee. Now we have 3 co-chairs who have equal powers from the Cabinet of Ministers, the Minister of Economy, Aivaras Abramovičius, second from the Parliament, Hanna Hapko, and from the Presidential Administration, Dmytro Shymkiv. We're meeting every week. That is a big list of issues, and we synchronize the situation on any reform, starting from judicial, anti-corruption, monitoring, implementation, execution of the law, of association agreement, what's happening with implementation of this agreement, what is to be done, coordination, because that requires coordination between 3 branches of power.
And also, we discuss in the next meeting that we plan to hold in early February, and we plan preliminarily to discuss the status of the ongoing reforms, the anti-corruption and court system reform, and of course there's a reform of the Ministry of Interior that Akas Guladze is talking actively about. Rather interesting results. It will be presented and discussed at the National Council for Reforms. Also on the 24th of December, there was a decree about the creation of the National Investment Council, and we are now consultant with the investment communities. And there used to be the Investors' Council at the President's office. This was rather a circle of selected people who talked once a year to a president, and then this was used in no way. And now there will be a rather more active body where the lawyers and private investors and private equity fund workers will be presented, and we will be able to discuss 3 main issues. First, the attracting investment to Ukraine. Second, specific projects about the involvement of attracting investment, agrarian, LNG terminals, and all this kind of stuff. And third, the solving of arguments and conflicts between the state bodies of power and big investors in Ukraine. This is part of my work, and I work as a mediator trying to find compromises between them. So we're talking now about the composition of this council. And the last, the rather important news is that the administration of the president has signed a memorandum on cooperation with the East European Fund. 5 interns will start to work with us, who will be helping us with the reforming process and some legal issues. And this is how we already work with the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy University. So this is all. Thank you. Any questions, please? 2 questions. First is brief, and second is not so brief. Do you know whether a meeting in a lesser Normandy format is possible without the president of Russia in Davos about the problems in the east of Ukraine? My second question is, as of the 21st of January, journalists in the anti-terrorist operation zone are going to work according to new rules, including the fact that we will have to inform the bodies of state power and the state security and the security service of Ukraine. We have to inform them to some electronic addresses that end in mail.ru, Yandex.ru. Do you plan to relinquish them at all? I have always been a adherent of the state when the mail services should be very maximally protected and not use the public resources. We think that these resources are not protected, especially the communication with the resource that is on the territory of the country that supports terrorism in Ukraine. So I think that certain conclusions will be made. The administration, all the workers of the administration of the president use the internal mail system, which allows us to have the adequate level of protection and also provides for the use of international standards in both protecting and following some and detecting some incorrect actions of some individuals. I cannot answer you on the first question because the situation is dynamically changing. The delegation has already flown to Davos. As a rule, such decisions are adopted on site, and there's a team that works directly with the president in Davos. What are the expectations that you have about Davos? What meetings have to happen there for us to say that this was successful for Ukraine? I think that there are 3 main directions about which we should talk. The understanding by Europe and the world that Ukraine is now protecting and defending the security of Europe. The understanding of this is of utmost importance to Ukraine, and we have to exert maximum efforts in dialogues and official and unofficial meetings to convey the issue. Ukraine is defending the security of Europe. Second, the issue of the information about the changes and reforms that are happening in Ukraine. Very often we hear skeptical points of view about the new authorities in Ukraine, but I want to remind you that the parliament's been in work only since December, and the new government only since December. But if we look at the initiatives that's been launched, I've been explaining to colleagues from Europe and the USA and future investors, when I tell them what's been already done, what projects were launched, and how we go along the reference points of these reforms, and of course explain them that we have democracy, not authoritarianism, and this slows down the process of decision making. It is very important to explain what we are doing and what results we are getting and what mentality changes are happening in the country and in the country's leadership. And the third issue is economy. The process of dialogue with the international financial institutions about attracting additional financial resource to support the economy of Ukraine, including financial help and investment. If we have a look at the comparison of getting financial help by the countries who are partners of the US, we are on the bottom of the list. So regrettably, over the 23 years, we've created a certain fatigue of Ukraine and a certain level of mistrust, and we now have to very quickly prove that we are different. And we are different. This is entirely different Ukraine. So when I'm talking about the three main issues, this is security, reforms, and economy, meaning the involvement of financial help. Will there be meetings with the representatives of the Russian delegation? As far as I know, organizers tried to put them apart. Well, there is a meeting that is called Geneva Ukraine Initiative. There will be representatives of Russian business, of some government structures. This is a dialogue initiated by the World Economic Forum. You should understand that this is not a Ukrainian or Russian initiative. This is the initiative of the World Economic Forum in the format of a discussion how we should live further, what are the problems, what are the economic after effects. We understand that there is an economy of Ukraine that is closely linked to the economy of Russia. We have a huge export to Russia, how we should replace it, how Russia sees this situation. This is a rather interesting dialogue that I am personally interested with. I proceed from this fact that je suis Volnovacha and I don't accept any sponsorship of terrorism. I would very much like to hear how even businessmen react to this, because first of all, the support for the fight against terrorism does not have frontiers. What is the responsibility of Minister for Energy Resources Dmytro for the contracts of export to Crimea, for recognizing Crimea as part of the Russian Federation, and because those contracts are loss-making. I know the situation. We are now in dialogue with the Ministry for Energy Resources in order to understand. I do not want to use the media information to analyze whether the contract is right or wrong. You understand very well that that a very well-oiled and organized machine of discreditation works against us. This is a professional machine that is embedding the messages into mass media, and it puts people in Ukraine on loggerheads to distract us from more important issues. I can't comment on this issue now because first you have to study the issue to see what were the decisions of the government, of the Council for National Defense and Security. But if there is such a contract, how will you explain it at the forum? let's examine the situation and how it arose, and then we will decide. Another question. You mentioned today the court system reform. Do you have any information how the illustration of judges is going on? As far as I know, it started on the 1st of December, but it seems that nothing is happening at the moment.
I will not give you any comments now because I remember I'm responsible for lustration as to 365 persons. And these are the heads of regional and district state administrations, the heads of law enforcement bodies, security service, prosecutor's office, head of the administration. That's the list. If you go to the website of the president, there's a section, renewal of administration. And there's the list of persons, the list of all the documents on every person, including declaration and everything. It's all online. The whole process is described. We simplified the law. We basically put the law into a diagram, and now I cannot provide comment on illustration of judges. I have one more question to you. As to National Council, have you started looking for project managers? If so, then what's happening? I believe that we will finish up with project office. My expectations are like the expectations of a business. The decisions are to be made faster in public sector. When international institutions are involved, it slows down the process because unfortunately we have negotiations with the BRD as to details of memorandum and agreement. There's a procedure which is described, and we discussed it with the BRD, how well this announcement on looking for project manager be published, and all the requirements of the EBRD are quite strict. I'm not happy with the length of the process which is suggested by the EBRD. Tomorrow I will have a meeting with the EBRD. I will request them to find some solution when the standard periods of time should be shortened for Ukraine, because we need to make decisions not during months but during weeks or days, weeks at least. As to looking for project managers, there are some project managers who are working already. They work with the support of different donor institutions like Renaissance Foundation. There's USAID foundations, and there are some strategic advisory groups under different ministries and agencies which work on the reforms. Thanks to the Executive Committee of Reforms and the team that I have, we coordinate all the work, we understand what's happening, everything that will be happening with creation of project offices, institutionalization of these groups, and putting them together in one structure where there will be standards and mechanisms and approaches. And we'll be able to consolidate all the financial support from different institutions. We'll make it systemic. We discussed that approach in autumn when we were discussing this idea with the EBRD and other donors, but they will hopefully focus on some other issues. These are all technical issues which are to be resolved. I want to launch as soon as possible, but there are some procedures, even international procedures, which are lengthy. Thank you, Dmytro. Looking forward to seeing you next week or in a week after Davos Forum. I wish us all success and peace. And the main thing is